Hi, very good evening, everyone. I am Harshita, consultant at DSCI. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone for joining this session on digital identities, Web2 versus Web3. Thank you for joining in this session. Now, I would like to introduce our panelists for this session. So, first, I would like to welcome Ms. Saritha Auti. She is Global CISO at UD Trucks. She will be moderating this session as well. Welcome, Ms. Saritha.
Thank you, Harshita. It's a
Yeah,
privilege to be part of this session. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah. So next is Mr. Kamlesh Nagware. He is CTO, Snapper Future Tech. Hello, Mr. Kamlesh. Welcome
Yeah,
to the
hi.
session.
Yeah, hi, Sita.
So next, I would like to welcome Mr. Lokesh Balu. He is technical lead at Dell Technologies. Hello, Mr. Lokesh. Welcome to the
Good evening,
session.
everyone. Thank you.
So next, I would like to call Mr. Mohan Bhat. He is MD and co-founder of Accops.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for inviting me here.
Thank you, sir. Privilege. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Sharat Chandra. He is Vice President, Research and Strategy at EarthId.
Hi everyone, a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, panelists, for joining in this session. Now, I would like to hand over this session to Ms. Saritha. She will be moderating this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshita. Um, team, first of all, it's very nice to be part of this esteemed panel, and I'm also looking forward to exchange notes and learn from this panel. I have few questions related to the digital identities and then credential management. So I will ask the panelists, and accordingly, we may also get into the details. And then maybe, if time permits, I want to pick up some of the scenarios for this in this context for us to discuss in detail. So, Kamlesh, I want to ask you if you can share your thoughts on how digital identities have changed the business in financial sector, and what are the business benefits versus security challenges, because it's a new concept, especially in India. It's new for many, and if you can throw some light on this, it will be very helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Sarita. So, generally, uh, when we present our paper document to something, we can verify like who we are. But in the internet, in the web, how we can prove ourselves our identity. So, there's a digital identities, and it's a very long journey from Web 1 to Web 3. How you can prove your identity on the any digital platform. So in the recent like Web3 technologies where we have digital identity, self-sovereign identity, with zero knowledge proof, cryptographic way, you can prove your identity without sharing the lot more information about yourself or your identity. And how this could help in the banking sector. So I believe like KYC and ML solution is going to be game changer with the help of digital identity and especially zero knowledge proof kind of algorithms. And I think CBDC, where the account-based CBDC, where you need the digital identity attached with some person, that could be the interesting use cases for the digital identity. And the zero knowledge to cryptographic algorithm, W3C standards, all is kind of solving the interesting business problems. Uh, So in normal identity with your federated identity with Google and any authenticator, you always share your information more than required. But in the customer perspective and user perspective, if they don't want to share the specific information, you don't have a control. So digital identity with blockchain-based technologies could be give this flexibility to user, so which they can control your identity website, like what information they need to share and what they don't want to share, and there could be new business model around it can be built around it.
Okay. This just asking a very layman question here. You spoke about KYC, right? it is still not completely operationalized or adopted in India in the way it should be or in the way it happens across the globe. So, do you have any thoughts on that? How it can be operationalized?
So I think KYC thing now, I think lots of banks already started like video KYC and audio KYC kind of thing, which you can use the you know to visit the specific bank to do the KYC. So it will take time, but I believe it in upcoming 4 to 5 year blockchain based KYC solution could be the good example.
Thank you. Mohan, would you want to explain the importance of credential management in this context and
Yeah.
also how this is all spanning out? We talk about FIDO, we talk about passwordless authentication. So, do you want to give some of your perspectives on this?
Yeah. See, if you look at the Web3 technologies, all the new found business models, for example, the cryptocurrency which has been there, or the new retail applications which has been there, all are banging on the Web3 technologies to take it to the next level. Many of the technologies which is yet to be launched, which is in a conceptual size, like the retail environment on AI, making the whole thing more seamless, is all about engaging with the customers to actually make the interaction time lesser. Now, if you look at the Web3 technologies, it is a boon for companies which are going to look at AI, which is going to look at blockchain to be used in a more extensive manner. Now, that's all about the technology. As you rightly said, the technology is going to ensure that far more interaction is going to happen from the customer side or the end user side. But anything and everything has to go through a strong identity mechanism. Now, any technology without a strong identity mechanism can always be a uh, ground for hackers to come inside, or unauthorized users to come inside, or bots to come inside. Now, you're well aware of these bots and other things which can actually exploit the Web2 technologies, right? So, many of the technologies, for example, you know that Razorpay recently had a compromise on their platform, and that was a concern. Now, all these new companies like Razorpay or anything, they're going to bang on Web3 technologies to make it more intuitive, at the same time, make it more secure. So, identity management becomes very critical for the Web3 technologies to ensure that the Web3 technologies can be really stepped upon. Now, under the identity management, just username password is not going to be acceptable anymore. It can be handed over. OTP can be handed over. So we need to have a combination of contextual security or some sort of an automated security where the software identifies the person instead of the person introducing him to the software, where the person can introduce as anyone. The software is expected to identify the person with many credentials, and the credentials what the end user is giving is only going to be a part of it. So the next thing what comes is, can it happen that user doesn't need to introduce himself at all? The technologies which has been there, like blockchain technologies, which is going to hold many other card and other cards information, should be attached when and where required, to see that the identity of a person, not only while authenticating, even in transit, he has to be verified and he has to be ensured that there is no compromise on it, or else the whole world is aware of how many types of hackers are there and how many types of compromises are happening. So passwordless technology is an interesting one, where the user actually doesn't have a provision to introduce himself, and the system actually identifies him. Then it becomes the intelligence of the system to see that how capable they are, to ensure that they find secretive mechanism in identifying. For example, if I try to log into a website, and if I'm trying to log into my colleague's website, website of a bank or anything at all, using colleagues' credentials, I put the username password and it'll say the password is wrong. So it informs me that I've made a mistake. So I have a choice to actually understand what is the right password and try again. That's where the hackers actually are comfortable, because there is a help coming from the website itself which tells that the person has put a wrong thing. So he has a chance of. So what is expected is there is no way that you can put a username and password. And what is expected is the system identifies you, and the user should not know that for what he has been rejected, right? So in that manner, the stronger authentication and the passwordless authentication will be something which will ensure Web3 technologies can be really used for the benefit of the world environments. This
So
is what I
it's
would like
quite
to.
informative. I was just thinking, actually, if I, as an user, layman user, right, not from IT, or maybe I'm just a housewife kind of scenario, where if I have to remember 10 passwords for all my accounts, bank account and other things, it's going to be a challenge. I will write it down somewhere, eventually it will get into somebody's hands, or I'll store it on my phone or laptop. These are the bad practices which many people do, because it's very hard to remember so many passwords. So in that context, I think I really liked the way you explained passwordless authentication. It's going to really help in the adoption of many of the security controls across, especially in the developing nations where the awareness is little less, and it will help with adoption.
Yeah. Just imagine that you have been asked to maintain a password, change it every 15 days, and you have been asked to have special characteristics in the password. And just imagine that you are asked to have a password which doesn't mean anything, it should all be jumbled. And just imagine that you have to have a password which you cannot write it anywhere and keep it. And it is a really Herculean task to actually create password, remember the password, and change it every 15 days, right? That's humanly impossible to go through all this. Passwordless authentication is going to help you on that. And the next thing is, let's consider layman people who create passwords, and they create easy passwords, and they're all subjected to attacks. Now, India with a large population, you can just imagine that if everyone are given digital identities, and that's only username and password, you will feel sorry for all the compromises which happens. With the passwordless authentication model and a stronger contextual engine which is running it, it actually helps the layman people also not to get compromised, and the system will actually take care of the entire security for logging in.
Certainly. Thank you so much for that. Sharat, you have been doing a lot of work related to web wallets adoption um, and uh, deep study of all these specifics about how do we handle our passwords and key documents in the era of digitization. So, can you throw some light on adoption of web wallets and pros and cons, especially in the Indian context?
Right. So I think Web3 wallets will be at the heart or the center of gravity when it comes to metaverse and the new era of internet. Because in the virtual world or in the immersive world, your wallet address will be your identifier. Now, we should look at wallets in the context of, can we have a composite wallet which can represent my credentials, verifiable credentials, which even Kamlesh alluded to, where I can establish or assert my identity in the physical world, and can I also store those verifiable credentials in a Web3 wallet and also transact or engage with others in the new economy. Now, this is also important in the sense that Web3 also espouses or advocates about users having the right control over their own data, right? Data ownership and data monetization as well. So a wallet will be the gateway to both Web3 world as well as the immersive world or the metaverse, where your wallet address will be your identifier, not your government issued ID or PAN or Aadhaar card, right? But imagine a composite wallet where a same wallet I can store my government issued IDs as well as my digital assets, my NFTs, my tokens. So if, as we speak, even ENS domain name services are unstoppable domains where a wallet address can be represented in the form of a name. So that is, I think, rightly linking to the identity of a certain person. But at the end of the day, it's still the wallet address, right? So again, reiterating the fact, the wallet addresses will be the new identifiers in the Web3 space, and we as technologists and entrepreneurs have to work towards how we can ensure the adoption of these wallets, because wallets will be the gateway to this new world, and a seamless adoption or a frictionless adoption is very much needed. And that's where passwordless authentication can be one of those enablers where you don't actually have to remember passwords for another wallet, right? It can be done through zero knowledge proof and biometrics, right? And self-sovereign identity also ensures that you can exercise complete control over your biometric data as well. So even if you take facial biometrics or even other forms of biometrics, right, using zero knowledge proof and blockchain, we can be rest assured that our data is going to be safe and secure.
Sharat. One following question on that is specifically you spoke about blockchain. How, I mean, I just want your perspective to this audience. How we can have blockchain strengthen the security aspects of the transactions.
Right. So the very nature of blockchain, right, or the first principles of blockchain talk about provenance, immutability, right, and most of the blockchains are Sybil resistant, right, and they're also resistant to all forms of attacks. So as and when new forms of consensus mechanism evolve and new forms of even quantum resistant cryptography is evolving as we speak, right. So I think these new technologies will also help people in keeping all those attacks at bay, and one of the most secure ways of transacting in the digital world.
So I just want to take a flip from the subject what we've been discussing. We've been discussing about the user experience, password, or digital identities. Now there are a lot of things which happen in the back end as well. I mean, I should not be saying it as back end. I'm just calling it as back end because the consumers or the users do not see what's happening in the back end. So one is authentication. There are applications. Then there are a lot of information is getting exchanged. It may be the payment gateways, or it may be the financial transactions, anything like that. But there are multiple things which happen in the back end, which are related to the applications and the infrastructure, which are holding the front end of any transaction, right? So, what, Lokesh, do you want to bring up your perspective about how do you secure the applications in the back end? Because there are, if you look at this entire transaction, right? One is what happens at layer 7, which is the presentation layer. There's a portal, there's a transaction happening, but there are a lot of transactions which are needed to be secure in the backend to make sure that applications and infrastructure cannot be compromised with the traffic which is coming from outside into the network. So, do you want to throw some perspective on this particular point?
Sure. So, as you rightly pointed out, there is a bunch of issues that we have to deal with when it comes to interaction with applications that support the backend of this entire Web3 or in general any Web2 or a Web1, Web2 based application platforms, right? So it deals with the entire lifecycle approach. We have to start throughout the lifecycle from the design all the way up to the delivery and maintenance. There are various types of security controls one need to look into. So one of the key aspect of this entire approach is to see things in a holistic fashion, not just doing a piecemeal approach. When we say that, we have to embed security and security practices throughout this life cycle based approach. Now, in the context of Web3, we get an additional layer. As our other panelists pointed out, we have a public or a private blockchain, and then we have an additional layer of decentralized identities upon which this entire workflow of an issuer, approver, and a verifier who will be involved in this verifiable credentials flow. And this new entity has to coexist with our traditional applications, which are based on Web1 or Web2 based architecture, a simple client server, right? So when you put all these things into perspective, we'll add new attack surfaces and attack vectors. Uh, why we need to emphasize this aspect is because we cannot follow the same approaches we follow to protect the Web2 and a Web1 platform. Rather, Web3 brings in new vectors. One piece is the usage of the public or private blockchain based platforms, which are predominantly open source and publicly driven projects with contributions and transparency. And the second set of factors involves multiple parties, as we mentioned, issuers and provers and verifiers in the verifiable credentials workflow. And combine this with the traditional vulnerabilities and attacks that we see on the software development based on the Web 1 and Web 2. So that means your attack surface and your opportunities where things could go wrong is multifold, which is why it's all the more important to embed the security throughout the lifecycle. When we talk about this secure design, development, and operations and maintenance, it's very essential to understand what are the unique things that we have to do with this new attack surface, right? Number one is a constant and thorough review of any third party libraries or open sources we use, and a thorough vetting of the underlying platform, the blockchain platform upon which your device, decentralized identifiers, and Web3 aspects are going to be based on. And the third aspect is the decentralized apps, also known as D apps, which are going to be based out of these blockchain based approaches. So these are the three new pieces in addition to the traditional HTML, CSS, or any .NET C# based platform development or software development involves. So all your traditional practices, whether it is about threat modeling, whether it is about vulnerability scanning, or it is about static code analysis or dynamic analysis, in addition to doing this for the traditional applications, it also need to be included and covered for the platforms based on blockchain, as well as for the decentralized apps that are going to be run, operated, and maintained on top of these platforms. So it's all the more important to start security from a developer's perspective, not as an afterthought. As a good example, we need to look at the developers who are working on blockchain platforms, or the developers who are writing the D apps on top of the blockchain should also need to be trained, educated, and well versed with secure design and development concepts, not just the traditional software developers. I think the traditional approach of secure development lifecycle gains extraordinary importance. In addition, the usage of huge amount of open source software and community contributed software in these Web3 workflow makes it all the more important that we take security very seriously from beginning, so that we don't have to handle things as an afterthought.
Thank you so much. It's a different perspective and very important perspective as well. Just a follow-up question on that. How do
Mhm.
you think these regulatory changes which are happening across the globe is influencing the shift left or DevSecOps kind of practice, which is gaining some momentum?
Definitely. So when we look at regulatory, the one major aspect is the data regulation, and the related aspect is the privacy. And when we connect that with the development happening in the Web3, which is all about decentralized or anonymous or a consensus-based approach, right? uh, Earlier, the way things or the monetary benefits are made out of a product or a service is changing heavily. The entire revenue generation model based on advertisement based approach is going to be going through a significant change because of the invent of Web3 and the enormous interest among stakeholders on Web3 based platforms and development. And this also brings the question of privacy and data governance into equation. It could be easy to see that many of the regulations centered around data privacy are based on data localization and geographical movement of data across multiple countries. But with Web3, it's quite interesting to see that the decentralization is going to bring in a new dimension, which means that we cannot assume the traditional privacy issues will be immediately solved because of the decentralized approach, but the traditional privacy issues will manifest itself in a totally different form in the Web3 world. So, as we always do, the vulnerability management and the vulnerabilities throughout the life cycle of any software, including the Web3 based off software, needs to be handled through a lifecycle approach, so that every software developer is informed about the regulatory and legal implications of the weakness that might be carrying. So we need to have a very robust security incident response process. A, we should also have a very robust application and product vulnerability response. These are two different things. The first thing is mostly about after you deploy a product, you need to have a mechanism to respond to the incidents happening on the operational network or the network in production, the applications in production. The second part is when you ship and when you operate a software, we need to have a vulnerability response program that allows corporates and organizations to respond to those vulnerabilities as and when happen, irrespective of whether an incident is associated with that. So in generally, people call this as CSERT and PSERT. Now, in the context of regulation, in the context of international legal requirements, it is all the more important that many of the emerging and the current regulations requires organizations to have a robust response process, vulnerability response process, both from a computer security incident response as well as from a application and product vulnerability response. So if we don't have that mechanisms, we are going to run into responding to such incidents in a ad hoc manner. So this is a crucial piece in addition to the emerging developments in the privacy landscape, which could manifest itself differently, especially in the Web3. So to summarize, I would say that the traditional practices of vulnerability response and incident response needs to have a different outlook when it comes to Web3 so that we can effectively and confidently handle the emerging international regulations related to data governance and privacy.
Thank you so much. That's quite insightful information. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
I have, I see the time, we have time, so I want to pick up a use case. And I want to ask Sharat if he wants to discuss any specific use case related to identity, which is helpful. And Mohan, I request you to pitch in as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Mr. Lokesh, on the regulation front, you spoke on the incident response and the data which has to be there. Now, with respect to the data, like logs and other things, which is very critical for organizations to keep it safe, right? And
True.
it also happens that people can analyze a lot of things. Something what we consider as junk, something what we consider as non-important could be always analyzed by AI or bots or something like that, and they can manifest into a big threat. So can you put light on the make in India concepts and the security which has to be kept within the boundaries of India on the Web3 thing,
Sure.
because it's going to be integrated with IoT, it is going to be integrated with human interfaces, and a lot of things are going to happen in an automated manner, right? People are going to think that everything is safe, right?
Yeah.
People are going to assume everything is, because then only you will allow an IoT to interact with you in an automated manner, because that's going to be taken into guaranteed that everything is safe. But these data which is going to be there, it's real of very huge importance, because it's all personal data which is going to be there. And if you can put light on what is the government regulations, it should be there within the boundaries of India, or what is it like?
I think we already have the privacy and data protection bill by the government of India in various stages of development. So, but as you said, Mr. Mohan, the challenge is pretty heavy, right? About how do we sensitize various stakeholders and bring consensus on this one. So there are approaches, whether it is about privacy engineering techniques or it is privacy based technologies, where things like de-anonymization, tokenization, which are already pretty much widely used in multiple financial sector and financial applications. Some of those is extendable to provide some level of protection. But I think it all goes back, if you look from fundamental standpoint, the principles, the data governance and privacy principles about consent, using the data for the purpose for which it is being collected, and also based on the norms for data localization and geographical movement. So these need to be thoroughly backed by government regulations and bills and protocols that supports that. We need to have legal binding towards that, right? When it comes to the other aspect about public data or data related to gadgets and devices, right? Again, there are a lot of industry regulations and sector specific guidelines. When it comes to medical industry or healthcare, we have a certain guidelines and we have certain protocols. Similarly, when it comes to industry manufacturing area, we have other set of guidelines. So while we have all these guidelines and regulations across industries existing in silos, we need to have a unified structure to bring them. So net to net, to summarize, this is definitely a challenge. It's emerging, and it is going to get even more prominent with the newer form of developments and operations, especially blockchain based approaches where we have decentralized identities to be heavily used. So current mechanisms of handling them have their own limitations because they are based on traditional views and traditional approaches. So with the decentralized identities and with the user consent, we need to entirely take a relook at how things are evolving in the context of national level and sector specific regulations and guidelines. And many of these are definitely evolving, and it's important to keep a tab on this space, and industries needs to and individual sectors needs to quickly embrace this, because sooner or later this will become mandates that they have to comply with.
Can I
Thank
add
you.
one more point to
Sure.
Lokesh's point?
Sure.
So, especially in the context of Aadhaar, where the Aadhaar team, they're looking at, they're positioning Aadhaar as Aadhaar 2.0, where they are keen on exploring blockchain, especially in the context of zero knowledge proof and selective disclosure. Let's say if you want to just disclose your PIN code, not the complete address, but in the current context, the Aadhaar XML file will eventually disclose much more than what is needed, right? So the Aadhaar team is looking at selective disclosure, or exploring mostly zero knowledge proof to reveal only details which are necessary for certain use cases or purposes, even for a low level KYC. So that is one. Now coming back to use case, which you earlier pointed out. So we are witnessing a strong inbound interest from our clients, especially in the case of data capture in the terms of first party data. So that there are different levels of data capture: first party, zero party, and third party data. So as we gradually move towards a cookie-less world, the marketers, mostly in the CPG space or consumer and packaged goods space, they are struggling how they can fine-tune their marketing campaigns with respect to a cookie-less world where eventually you will have no data to access to. So that's where a privacy preserving approach, or maybe a wallet approach, is needed, where you can incentivize users to sign up and maybe offer them some tokens, so that in the process they eventually and willingly share data in a consent based manner with the brands, and they can fine tune, or they can create or curate their own campaigns. So that is one use case I would like to point it out.
Sharat, just I wanted to add to what you said. So, does that not shift the identity-driven access from identity-driven access to data-driven access? Does that not shift that?
Essentially yes, but since as we talk about Web3, right, where the individual user will have the access to even read, write, and own the data, right? So that's where eventually it will come down to data monetization and data ownership, and how you
Yeah.
assert your rights on that data. That will eventually lead to newer business model, and that's why even brands are looking at ways how they can incentivize users, or prompt them to share that data with with the brands, or the companies they like.
Okay. Because
And I
it's a
think
very different
one
concept. Right? Sorry, Kamlesh, go ahead.
Yeah. So even like when we use the data model and kind of it will add more security and privacy in the transaction. Like earlier, one particular identity used to the all the transaction, but now with the digital identity and zero knowledge proof, you could have a separate identities running for the particular transaction, which can be achieved via the uh, SSI and DIDs. So like your identity is one, but when you're doing transaction, there is one-to-one transaction between the parties. That will add the more security and privacy in any kind of transaction processing.
And what's also happening is, especially in the context of metaverse and Web3 space, where your identity can also be tokenized in the form of NFT. So, and that token can easily traverse across different metaverse ecosystems, where you don't have to actually prove your identity again and again. Your physical credential can be tokenized, and that token will be used to represent your identity in different ecosystems. So that's another way of looking at it. So that can be used to token your identity, and that token can be used to represent your identity in different ecosystems. So that's another way of looking at it. So that can be used to token your identity, and that token can be used to represent your identity in different ecosystems. So that's another way of looking at it. or taking the example of verifiable credentials to another level.
Thank you. Thank you. This is very good, actually. Something for me also to learn and adopt in my CISO journey. Thank you so much. Mohan, you want to discuss any specific use case related to credentials and the handling of credentials and adoption of the same?
Yeah. So at this moment of time, if you look into any apps or any technologies or any access mechanisms to business applications or retail applications or anything at all, there's a huge amount of concern which has been there with respect to identity management, and there is a huge amount of concern or time taken to log into specific web environments. For example, you need to have a username and password, you need to have an OTP. Then after that, the web application actually identifies whether the application which you're working from is a known application, the platform is known, or something like that. The huge amount of importance is given to authentication. So what we believe is that once the Web3 technologies is being on the run, then the time taken to reach an application which will be through the Web3 technologies will be very much lesser. And so the concern which will be there is to create stronger platforms than actually ensure that there are some ad hoc environments which is going to be used for authentication. So my per se is that the Web3 is going to make things more faster, and businesses can run much more easier, and the time of interaction will increase. Right? Already we have been looking at people calling up Alexa and booking things. Still, there is a interaction which has been happening on that to set the whole thing up. So with the latest technology, what we're looking at is the businesses can grow because the time taken and the concern of authentication can be reduced completely. So that's what interests me on the Web3 technologies.
Thank you so much. I'm as a CISO, I'm just always concerned about the attack surface, which it increases beyond. So it's bit of skepticism is always there.
Very
However,
much.
yeah,
It is going to increase the attack surface. As the gentleman said, you're going to create a new vector which can also be compromised. So it's going to increase the platform on which security has to be there. We need to be more paranoid about what can go wrong. Yeah, that is always there.
yeah. So I think it's time for us to gear up and make sure that we have enough defense mechanisms to protect the environment and spread the awareness to make sure that people understand who are in the thick of things, who to understand what are the possible attack vectors and how do they make sure that the environment is secure for the transactions and both in the backend as well.
There should be many mass rollouts which has to
So just
happen.
one.
So nothing can be actually planned in a closed door. There'll be a lot of rollouts which has to happen, and mass rollout has should happen. And quantity will actually drive the quality. Unless there's a huge quantity on success, the quality will not come out.
Absolutely. Yes. Lokesh, you were saying something, so
Yeah, I would just want to add to Mr. Mohan's point and also to the rest of the panelists. And I also saw a couple of questions in the chat about what could be likely the frameworks to handle the security in this emerging space. I think one general theme is probably it may not require us to forget the fundamentals. Um, or the existing frameworks. So many of the existing frameworks, whether it is your Center for Internet Security's CSC controls, or your NIST cybersecurity framework, or the GDPR, or the ISO 27000 families, right? Many of these would still be relevant in terms of applying and securing the frameworks for the FinSec industry. But specifically from a Web3 standpoint, which is dealing with a lot of decentralized identities, one thing I would like to call out is the NIST 863-3 A, B, and C, which is the Digital Identities series, which specifically caters to the nature of financial technical industry and to a global digital audience. So The main challenge it tries to solve is who are we serving, and how do we deal with the variety of money laundering issues, and the need for the robust KYC, and variety of other things. I think some of the aspects of that could be based on the Digital Identity Series 800-63-3 ABC. And the other aspect when it comes to industry standards, especially for decentralized apps and fintech, is to look at zero trust architecture, right? Which is also, there is another NIST document, if I remember correctly, it's NIST 800-207 special publication. So this talks about how running a fintech in a blockchain, or a decentralized peer-to-peer currency, maybe a cryptocurrency, on how to develop and implement an architecture that is based on zero trust, right? So how do we really verify things throughout and not assume trust, right? Rather follow the flipped mindset of assume breach. I think these are the two, and maybe if I have to add one more, the existing NIST third-party risk management framework, which is also ideal for any business. The reason why I'm specifically insisting on NIST third-party risk management framework, which is again not new, it's been in the industry, is the heavy usage of public contributions on the blockchain development and the development of the marketplace from where people are going to install, download the decentralized apps. So to summarize, the Digital Identity Series 800-63, the Zero Trust Architecture special publication 800-207, and the NIST third-party risk management framework, I think, and in addition to the traditional risk management frameworks and approaches like ISO, CIS benchmarks, would go a long way in really protecting the new and emerging ecosystem. I just thought I'll call out this. Thank you.
You just snatched a point which I wanted to talk about. That was risk from third-party collaborations. So that was very good. Thank you. And I also, for the audience, I have put these list numbers so that they can note it down and they can do more reading on that.
Thank you.
On the third party again, it's so one angle is about the collaboration and the code and who has developed code. We have no idea. We just download and use it. That's one angle to it. Another is it's the entire third party ecosystem. Even if our organization, if we don't use this GitHub, these kind of codes or open source codes, uh, our suppliers may be using it. So that is another thing which adds more risk into the entire business landscape.
Uh, Absolutely. So that's why if you see this space, right, it has been extensively getting important. Couple of things I want to talk about, improvements or solutions, which is what I believe most of us would like to hear. So from my experience, I see that the recent executive order from the United States federal agencies also clearly indicate that any organization that produces software should meet a requirement of developing an inventory. They call it as bill of materials, or
Yeah.
BOM, right? So they extend this concept and then make it like SBOM, or software bill of materials. There is an executive order towards this front. So what this basically means is, whether you are an organization producing a software, or whether you are an organization consuming a software from a third party, whether it is open source or commercial off the shelf, it's important that we have a bill of material managed software bill of materials. It is going to be eventually mandated either through every government's federal regulation, central government's needs, or through other compliance and standards mechanism where this will be mandated, right? So when this also increases a certain level of trust. For example, if any organization is building a complex software, customers should be programmatically retrieve what are the individual components that this software is made up of, or this platform or a product is made up of. Let's say if you're using an open source from a particular development or a GitHub project, they will know with what degree of confidence they can trust that particular product because it's carrying a X or a Y open source package. Uh, so the reason why I'm emphasizing this software bill of materials and the associated executive orders happening in some parts of the world, this will eventually catch up in rest of the countries, and it will be embedded into the individual country specific regulations. It's quite possible. Even otherwise, if it is not happening, to increase customer confidence and trust on the third-party software, it's important for teams to maintain this bill of materials as an inventory. That's number one. And there is also a licensing aspect related to this, which is predominantly legal thing, but that's a side topic. The other thing is, after you do an inventory, you need to ensure this entire bill of material is free of vulnerabilities, especially the third-party commercial software or the free open source software. This requires us to understand the security assurance practices of the third party. So every organization should have a robust mechanisms to scan and also process the publicly known vulnerabilities on any third-party software we are processing. This reminds the fundamental practice that we discussed a little early about embedding the vulnerability management and other secure development lifecycle practices at every stage of software development, whether it is in-house development or procured from outside. So two things I would reiterate. One is maintaining this software bill of materials as an inventory and also performing scans on third party, especially the open source software that we get from the GitHub and other related locations.
Absolutely. And this is picking up big time in China and Japan if you follow these countries for their amendments on the third
True.
party and the software bill of material.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. And it's indeed a pleasure. I learned quite a bit from all of you. It's pleasure talking to all of you. And any questions on the audience? Let's just check once. Otherwise, we can wind up. I think there are a few questions. So this is for Accops, Mohan, sorry.
Yeah, do Accops block blacklisted IP which has been passed through the firewall? Yes, we do. So we have a mechanism of a contextual engine which has been running, through which you can actually identify and take call automatically. The point here is to ensure how frequently and how efficiently you can do it faster. Yeah, we do that.
Thank you for that. Harshita, I know we are out of time.
No issues. Yeah. So I think we don't have any more questions, and it was a great session. Learned a lot. Thank you to each panelist. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Thanks a lot to
and
all.
have a nice evening.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Great to meet you all. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining in this session. Thank you.